For months, veteran Ethan Cole's life in Cedar Falls was nothing but quiet shifts at the garage and long nights haunted by memories of war. But one rainy evening, his German Shepherd Rex dragged him into a dark alley where they found a trembling golden retriever pup abandoned inside a soaked cardboard box. Ethan thought it was simple compassion to take the pup home, but it was more than that. It was the beginning of a miracle. He didn't know that raising this fragile life would not only heal his own broken soul, but also unite a divided community and thrust him into a fight against men who would stop at nothing to take the pup away. Please support us by subscribing to the channel to follow this emotional journey. Rain fell over Cedar Falls in slanted sheets, the kind of rain that blurred neon lights into bleeding smudges and filled every cracked gutter with restless water. On nights like this, the small industrial city felt lonelier than the desert itself, its streets echoing with the hollow hum of flickering lamps and the hiss of tires on slick asphalt. Ethan Cole walked with his head lowered, boots heavy against the wet pavement, his German Shepherd, Rex, keeping pace by his side like a soldier still on duty. Ethan was 38, his face marked by years of hardship and quiet battles that no medals were given for. He was tall, broad-shouldered, though thinner than he should have been from days skipping meals, and his blue-gray eyes had the distant look of a man who had once stared too long at horizons lined with smoke. His brown hair was trimmed short, in the military style he had never shaken off, and a week's worth of unshaven stubble shadowed his jaw. Tonight, like every night, he wore his dark navy flannel beneath a weather-beaten Carhartt jacket, jeans that had seen years of labor, and boots that still carried the weight of foreign sands in their soles. The city had given him little since he returned, but he carried himself with the quiet gravity of a man still sworn to protect something, even if he wasn't sure what that was anymore. Rex trotted beside him, steady and alert. At 7 years old, Rex was no longer the young military canine he had been, but his body was still strong and his stride purposeful. His coat of black and tan gleamed under the streetlight when the rain struck it, his ears pointed, his gaze sharp, scanning every corner as if Cedar Falls itself was a battlefield that might turn hostile at any moment. He wore the same harness he had been trained in, faded green canvas with frayed edges, a relic of service days that, like Ethan, refused to be discarded. The bond between man and dog was not simply companionship. It was forged through fire, through nights when Rex had saved Ethan by lunging at an unseen enemy, through mornings when Ethan had whispered his gratitude into fur before heading back out to war. Now, even in a city where the wars were different, poverty, loneliness, the ghosts of memory, Rex still walked with him as his shadow, his protector, and his last remaining comrade. That night, Cedar Falls was quieter than usual. Most folks stayed indoors when the rain came down like this. Ethan and Rex turned down a narrow side street lined with shuttered warehouses, their corrugated metal doors groaning with age. The neighborhood was an afterthought of the city, once buzzing with the hum of machines, now left to rust and rot. Ethan had no reason to be there, except that his feet often carried him on long walks after work at Jensen's garage, where he patched old engines for a few dollars. Walking kept the silence in his apartment from crushing him entirely. Tonight, he thought it would be another circuit of pointless wandering, another night where only Rex's presence kept him tethered to the world. But Rex stopped suddenly, his body stiff, head turning sharply toward an alley between two warehouses. His ears pricked, and a low growl rose from his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, his voice a low rumble worn by years of command and cigarettes. The growl shifted into a short bark, urgent but not hostile. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash and stepped cautiously toward the alley. His boots splashed in shallow puddles, the rain dripping from the brim of his hood. The alley was dimly lit by a single buzzing lamp, its light fractured by the curtain of rain. At first, he saw nothing but trash bags piled against the wall and the skeletal frame of a broken shopping cart. Then he heard it, a faint whimper, high-pitched and desperate, nearly swallowed by the storm. His heart gave a strange lurch. He knew that sound. Not exactly the sound, but the note beneath it, the plea of something small, wounded, abandoned, the kind of sound he had heard on battlefields too many times when men called out with their last strength. He swallowed, his chest tight, and motioned Rex to stay behind him as he edged forward. There, shoved against the wall, sat a collapsed cardboard box, its edges softened by rain. From within, a tiny shape stirred. A puppy. Golden fur, soaked and plastered against fragile ribs, eyes wide with terror, yet still glowing faintly with life. Its body trembled violently, paws too weak to steady itself. Scattered near the box were bits of cheap kibble, swollen from the rain, suggesting someone had left the pup here with careless neglect. Ethan crouched slowly, his knees cracking under the weight of years and the damp cold. He extended a hand, palm open. "Hey, little one," he murmured, his voice gentler than he remembered it could be. "What are you doing out here?" The puppy lifted its head, ears drooping, and made a feeble attempt to move. Its legs gave out almost immediately, but it dragged itself forward inch by inch, until its small nose touched Ethan's rough palm. Warmth spread from that fragile touch straight into Ethan's chest. The pup pressed its head against his skin as if surrendering, as if all its instincts had been replaced by one desperate plea, "Help me." Behind him, Rex whined softly, not in jealousy, but recognition. The old soldier of a dog seemed to understand that this tiny creature was not a threat, but a broken thing, one that needed protection. Ethan scooped the puppy up, feeling its heart flutter wildly against his arm. The rain soaked into his jacket, but he barely noticed. For the first time in years, something stirred in him that wasn't bitterness or weariness. It was responsibility, raw and immediate. He looked down at the pup's matted golden fur, at the way its ribs showed through its thin body. "You poor thing," he whispered. "Guess you're mine now." The puppy gave a weak whimper, then nestled its head under his chin as if sealing a pact. Ethan stood, pulling his jacket tighter around the trembling body. Rex fell into step beside him, casting a watchful eye over the bundle in Ethan's arms. They walked back through the rain-soaked streets, a soldier, his comrade, and now a fragile new recruit who had chosen him without words. By the time Ethan reached his apartment on the edge of town, the storm was easing. He laid the pup on an old blanket near the heater, watching as it curled into a trembling ball. Rex sat close, head tilted, protective but curious. Ethan squatted beside them, brushing wet strands of fur from the pup's face. He thought of names. Nothing stuck until he noticed the faint shimmer in its coat when the light hit just right. It reminded him of sunlight breaking through clouds after endless days of storm. "Sonny," he said softly. The name felt right, simple, and warm. "That's what you'll be." The puppy's tail gave the faintest twitch, and Ethan smiled, a rare, fragile thing on his hardened face. For years he had walked Cedar Falls with only ghosts at his side. Now, in the most unlikely of places, under the storm and among rusted warehouses, he had found something alive that wanted him. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel entirely alone. The morning after the storm had left Cedar Falls smelling of wet asphalt and faint rust, Ethan Cole rose earlier than usual. Sleep had been shallow. Every sound in the night had drawn his attention back to the small golden puppy curled on a blanket by the heater. Sonny had survived the night, though his frail body had twitched with restless dreams. Now, as dawn pressed gray light through the blinds, Ethan crouched beside the pup. Sonny blinked open his eyes, liquid brown pools still foggy with exhaustion, and gave a tiny wag of his tail. Ethan poured water into a dented tin bowl and set it down. He had little food left, just canned beans and a half loaf of bread from yesterday, but he shredded some bread into pieces and softened it in the water. Sonny devoured it clumsily, spilling more than he ate, while Rex stood nearby, his head cocked, ears angled back. The older German shepherd's dark eyes flicked between Ethan and the pup, uncertain, as though asking why this stranger now shared their home. Ethan reached over, scratching Rex's ear. "Easy, boy. He's not replacing you. He just needs us." As days stretched into weeks, Ethan fell into a new rhythm. Every morning, before heading to work at the garage, he checked Sonny's ribs, stroked his fur to see if it had grown softer, and filled the bowls as best he could. He gave Sonny the bigger portion, though it meant his own meals grew thinner. His stomach growled at night, but there was something in the sight of Sonny's belly, finally round with food, that quieted the hunger better than beans ever could. Rex tested his patience at first. He circled the puppy like a sentinel, sometimes nudging him too roughly, making Sonny tumble onto his back with a startled yelp. Ethan had worried there would be jealousy, but with time Rex's behavior shifted. The German shepherd began lying across the door threshold as if guarding not only Ethan but Sonny too. When Sonny whimpered, Rex would nudge him with his nose until he quieted. Ethan caught himself smiling at the sight, rare warmth softening the lines of his face. One afternoon, with scraps of wood he had scavenged from behind Jensen's garage, Ethan built a crude pen against the side of his apartment. His hands, calloused from years of handling weapons and wrenches, worked patiently as he hammered each board in place. Sonny watched, head tilted, tail thumping on the dirt, as if he understood something important was being made just for him. When the pen was done, Ethan set down a patched blanket inside. Sonny patted in, sniffing, then curled into the fabric with a sigh of satisfaction. "There," Ethan said softly, "your own corner of the world." Not everyone in Cedar Falls shared his sentiment. The first to voice it was Mrs. Donnelly, who ran the corner store. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp cheekbones, steel-gray hair pinned in a tight bun, and hands always smelling faintly of flour and cigarettes. She had lived her whole life in Cedar Falls, knew everyone's business, and had never hesitated to share her judgments. One morning, when Ethan stopped by for dog food he could barely afford, she squinted at him over the counter. "You can't even keep your own cupboards full, Ethan Cole. And now you're feeding another mouth? That's foolishness." Her voice was not cruel, but dismissive, as though speaking to a boy who hadn't learned his lesson. Ethan met her eyes, but said nothing. He was used to the weight of others' opinions pressing against his choices. In the Army, he had learned silence could be its own kind of defense. He simply paid, slid the crumpled bills across the counter, and left with Rex and Sonny trailing behind. Later that week, Jensen, the old mechanic who owned the garage where Ethan worked part-time, had his say too. Jensen was 62, with a back stooped from decades of leaning over engines, a mane of white hair always smudged with grease, and a permanent scowl etched deep into his face. He was not unkind, but hardship had hardened him, and his tongue rarely spared anyone. Watching Ethan coax Sonny to drink water from a bowl behind the garage, Jensen spat tobacco into the dirt and grumbled, "That pup won't make it. Scrawny thing like that's got no chance. You're wasting your strength." Ethan looked at Sonny, who was clumsily lapping at the water, ears too large for his head, tail swishing weakly but with determination. "He's tougher than he looks," Ethan said quietly. Jensen shrugged, unconvinced, and went back to his engine. That night, Ethan sat on the small porch of his apartment, Rex at his feet, Sonny nestled in his lap. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, but here on the outskirts, the night was darker, quieter. Ethan stroked the puppy's fur, now beginning to dry into soft waves of gold. He thought of Mrs. Donnelly's sharp words, of Jensen's scowl, of every voice that had once told him he wouldn't last after the war. In Sonny's eyes, wide and trusting, he saw something of himself, beaten down, underestimated, yet still holding on. The days that followed were small battles. Sonny's legs grew stronger, his appetite fiercer. Rex taught him in his own silent way how to play and when to be still. Ethan patched the holes in his jacket, but bought better food for Sonny. Each sacrifice weighed less than the emptiness he had felt before. For years, Ethan had walked Cedar Falls with no anchor, drifting like a man still lost overseas. Now, in the fragile heartbeat of a rescued pup, he felt the faint pulse of belonging. By the end of the month, neighbors still shook their heads, some pitying, some mocking. But Ethan no longer heard them in the same way. He had Sonny now. And though the pup was small and frail, in Ethan's weary chest burned a quiet resolve. He would not let this one slip away. The air in Cedar Falls had shifted with the arrival of spring. The snowmelt had long since drained into the gutters, and the city carried a dampness that clung to brick walls and alleyways. Ethan Cole found himself walking more often through the streets, not just with Rex, but now with Sonny trotting eagerly at his heels. The golden retriever pup, though still small, had grown stronger. His golden fur was brighter, no longer matted, and his legs, once shaky, now carried him with a clumsy but determined bounce. To Ethan, each step Sonny took was a quiet victory. To the townsfolk, however, Sonny's presence was something else entirely. The first time Ethan walked both dogs down Main Street, heads turned. Cedar Falls was a small place, and people noticed when something new appeared. A golden retriever puppy was a rare sight here, where most families kept mongrels or working dogs suited to guarding warehouses. Whispers followed Ethan as he passed. "That's a golden, isn't it? Where'd he get that one? Dogs like that are worth real money." Ethan kept his head down and he used to gossip trailing behind him like an unwanted shadow. Rex walked at his side, posture stiff, as if he too sensed the eyes watching. Sonny, oblivious, sniffed every lamp-post, his tail wagging freely. One afternoon, Ethan stopped at Mrs. Donnelly's store to pick up more food. The woman stood behind her counter, as rigid as ever, her hair pulled into the same unforgiving bun. She glanced at Sonny and pursed her lips. "That pup's going to stir talk you don't want, Ethan. Best keep him out of sight." Ethan only nodded. He had no patience for warnings spoken in a tone that implied she already believed he would fail. He paid and left, the bell above the door clanging behind him. Later that week, while Ethan was repairing an old pickup at Jensen's garage, a man appeared at the entrance. The newcomer moved with the easy arrogance of someone who believed the street bent for him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a lean face made sharper by a long scar running from his cheekbone to the edge of his jaw. His hair was dark, slicked back with oil, and his eyes, small and glinting, measured everything as if appraising its worth. He wore a black leather jacket weathered at the seams, a faded shirt beneath, and dark jeans tucked into boots scuffed from hard use. On his head sat a wide-brimmed black hat that seemed too clean for honest work. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice rough, carrying a drawl that dragged like gravel. "Heard you're the one fixing engines out here." Jensen, wiping his hands on a rag, eyed him warily. "Depends who's asking." The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name Silas Moore. Just a man looking to keep his truck running." He gestured casually toward an old Chevy idling at the curb. Ethan, standing near the hood of another vehicle, felt Rex stiffen at his feet. The shepherd's ears went rigid, his gaze locked on the stranger as though sensing something dangerous beneath the polished exterior. Sonny, who had been dozing in the corner, stirred and padded forward, curious. His soft bark broke the silence. Silas's gaze flicked instantly to the pup, and for the first time, real interest sparked in his eyes. "Well now," Silas drawled, crouching slightly. "That's a fine golden you've got there. Rare to see one in a place like this." He stretched out a hand, but Rex growled low, lips curling back. Silas chuckled and withdrew, his scar tightening with the smile. "Protective, I see. Can't blame him. A pup like that's worth a pretty penny." Ethan stood straighter, his voice steady but cold. "He's not for sale. Now, don't be quick to turn a man away." Silas tilted his head, studying Ethan, as though sizing up not just the man, but the life behind his eyes. "Everything's for sale, especially in a town like Cedar Falls. You've got bills, I've got money. $20 for the pup." He said it like he was offering more charity than business. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not for sale," he repeated. Jensen cleared his throat, stepping closer, but wisely kept silent. He knew Silas Moore by reputation. Most people did. Silas was known for running dogs across county lines, selling them to breeders or worse. Folks whispered about cages kept in warehouses, about animals disappearing from backyards. No one ever proved anything, but the fear was enough. Silas straightened, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. "You think you're different, soldier?" His eyes narrowed, voice dropping low. "This city doesn't let you keep what you want, not for long." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy, turned on his heel, and strode back to his truck. The Chevy roared as he drove off, leaving only the sour tang of exhaust in the air. Ethan watched him go, hands clenched at his sides. Inside, old instincts stirred, the same ones that had kept him alive in war zones, the ones that told him danger rarely left without a plan to return. Sonny pressed against his leg, tail wagging uncertainly, as if sensing his unease. Ethan crouched, resting a hand on the pup's head. "Don't worry, he's not getting you, not while I'm breathing." Rex stood beside them, gaze still locked on the street where Silas had vanished, a soldier ready for orders. That night, as Ethan sat on his porch, the memory of Silas's smile replayed in his mind. He had faced enemies with rifles and bombs, but there was something about men like Silas, men who treated lives as commodities that dug deeper into his chest. He knew this wasn't the end. Whispers had begun in town, and whispers had a way of turning into storms. The night had fallen over Cedar Falls like a heavy blanket, the air damp and still after an early evening drizzle. Street lamps hummed faintly, casting cones of pale light across empty sidewalks, while the rest of the neighborhood lay in shadows. Ethan Cole sat at the small wooden table in his apartment, the faint ticking of a wall clock keeping him company. Rex was stretched out by the door, head resting on his paws, always alert even in rest. Sonny lay curled on an old quilt near the heater, chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of sleep. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind restless. Silas Moore's words from the garage still echoed in his thoughts. "This city doesn't let you keep what you want." Ethan had faced men like that before, men who spoke in threats but moved with greed. In the war, he'd known how to deal with such men. Here, in Cedar Falls, the rules were blurred. He had promised himself never to raise his gun unless he had to, but he couldn't shake the knowledge that Silas was not the type to simply walk away. The sound came just after midnight. A faint scrape at the fence, almost drowned by the wind. Rex was up immediately, ears pointed, body stiff. Ethan rose silently, his hand already reaching for the revolver tucked in a drawer. Sonny whimpered, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Through the thin curtains, Ethan saw shadows slipping across the yard. 3 figures moving low and fast. They weren't kids pulling a prank. These men had purpose. Ethan's jaw clenched. He whispered, "Stay close," into Sonny, though the pup was too young to understand. The back door creaked as one of the intruders tried to force it. Rex exploded into a snarl, leaping forward with a ferocity that shook the night. The door burst open, and a man stumbled inside, only to be met by 100 pounds of muscle and teeth. Rex's jaws clamped onto the man's arm, and his scream tore through the quiet neighborhood. Another intruder pushed in behind him, stocky and broad, his face obscured by a hood. Ethan fired a shot into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the small room. Plaster rained down, and the men froze, the reality of live ammunition changing their courage into hesitation. "Out!" Ethan growled, his voice carrying the authority of a soldier who had once commanded men under fire. His revolver stayed steady, his stance firm. The two men yanked their injured companion back, cursing as they scrambled toward the yard. A third figure, still outside, whistled sharply, and then all three melted into the dark as quickly as they had come. The yard was silent again, except for the heavy panting of Rex and the high-pitched whimper of Sonny, who scrambled into Ethan's lap, pressing his warm body against his chest. Ethan's heart was still hammering, his hand steady on the revolver, though his thoughts raced. These weren't random thieves. Silas had sent them, testing him, probing his defenses. Within minutes, lights flicked on in neighboring houses. Doors opened. Among the first to appear was Jensen, the mechanic, his tall frame hunched with age, but his eyes still sharp. He wore a flannel shirt stained with oil and clutched a heavy wrench as if it were a weapon. "What in God's name's going on, Cole?" Others followed. A young couple across the street, still in their pajamas, whispered nervously. Mrs. Donnelly appeared in her robe, her hair loose for the first time Ethan had ever seen it, her mouth drawn tight with both fear and disapproval. "You firing guns in the middle of the night now?" she demanded. Ethan stepped onto the porch, Sonny still tucked against him, Rex pressed to his side. He didn't bother raising his voice. It carried enough weight, even low. "Men tried to break in. They weren't after me. They were after him." He nodded to Sonny. There was a murmur, disbelief mixed with unease. Jensen studied Ethan, then looked down at Rex, who still bared his teeth toward the darkness beyond the yard. Finally, the old mechanic gave a short nod. "Damn fool men," he muttered, "but I saw it. They meant business. You held your ground." Mrs. Donnelly crossed her arms, but her sharpness was tempered with something else now, uncertainty, perhaps even respect. "You're going to bring trouble down on this street, Ethan," she said, but her eyes lingered on Sonny, who was trembling in Ethan's arms, and she didn't sound as convinced as she once had. The neighbors drifted back to their homes, shaken, but calmer. Jensen lingered a moment longer, his face serious. "You need to be careful, Cole. Men like Silas don't stop, but I reckon tonight showed you've got more fight in you than folks gave you credit for." He turned and walked back across the road, his figure swallowed by the dark. Inside again, Ethan set Sonny down gently. The pup pressed close to Rex, who lowered his head, offering warmth and reassurance. Ethan holstered the revolver, but his eyes stayed on the door long after the yard was empty. He knew what had happened tonight was only the beginning, but he also knew something else. When Sonny had buried his head in his chest, trusting him completely, Ethan had felt a shift deep inside. For the first time in years, someone needed him again, and for that he would fight. The storm arrived without warning, sweeping into Cedar Falls with the violence of a freight train. Clouds piled heavy above the city. Thunder rattled the thin window panes of Ethan's apartment, and the air smelled of iron and ozone. By dusk, the rain came in furious sheets, pounding rooftops and turning gutters into torrents. Ethan Cole stood by the window, his brow furrowed, watching the yard where he had built Sonny's crude wooden pen. The boards rattled under the weight of the wind, and he cursed himself for not reinforcing it earlier. Rex paced near the door, uneasy, his instincts already reading the sky as hostile. Sonny, not yet accustomed to storms, whined and shifted nervously inside his pen, ears flattened against his head. The first crash of thunder made him leap up, eyes wide with fear. Ethan started toward the door, but before he could reach it, a savage gust tore the pen's roof away like paper. Sonny bolted in terror, squeezing through the broken slats and dashing out into the rain-swept darkness. "Sonny!" Ethan's voice was swallowed by the storm. Without hesitation, Rex lunged forward, clawing at the door. Ethan grabbed his jacket and revolver from the table out of habit. Old training never allowed him to step into danger unarmed, and flung the door open. The rain hit him like cold fists, soaking him in seconds. He sprinted across the yard with Rex at his side, heart pounding with dread. The streets of Cedar Falls were nearly deserted. A few lights glowed in windows, shapes of neighbors passing in front of curtains, but no one dared step outside. Ethan splashed through ankle-deep water, shouting Sonny's name into the wind. His eyes scanned alleys, gutters, every corner, where a terrified puppy might hide. Then he heard it, a faint yelp, carried weakly above the roar of water. It came from the storm drain at the corner of Maple Street. The grate had overflowed, water rushing like a river into the gaping mouth of the culvert. Sonny clung desperately to the edge of the concrete lip, his golden fur plastered to his trembling body, his paws slipping as the current pulled him toward the dark. His eyes locked on Ethan's, wide with terror. "Hold on!" Ethan roared, though his voice was almost torn away by the wind. He dropped his revolver on the curb, stripped off his heavy jacket, and without a thought leapt into the churning water. The cold was a shock, biting into his bones, but instinct drove him forward. He reached the pup, just as Sonny's small body slid toward the black mouth of the drain. Ethan wrapped an arm around him, pulling him tight to his chest, kicking hard against the current until his boots scraped the curb. Rex, barking wildly above, darted back and forth until Ethan managed to hoist himself up with one arm. With a grunt, he lifted Sonny onto the sidewalk, then hauled himself out, coughing water from his lungs. Sonny collapsed against him, shivering violently, but alive. Ethan pressed the trembling pup against his chest, wrapping his jacket around both of them. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely. "You're safe now." A voice called out from across the street. Through the sheets of rain, Ethan glimpsed a figure rushing toward them. Officer Caleb Marsh, a local patrolman. Caleb was in his early 40s, tall and broad, with a square jaw and short-cropped blond hair that was already wet from the storm. He wore a rain-slick uniform, badge gleaming under the streetlight, and his steady eyes reflected both concern and quiet respect. Caleb had a reputation in Cedar Falls, a lawman who did his job without arrogance, who had once been a high school football star, but had chosen the badge over brighter prospects after his father, also a cop, was killed in the line of duty. That history had given him a seriousness, a weight behind every word he spoke. "Cole, you all right?" Caleb shouted above the rain, slowing as he saw Ethan clutching the pup. His gaze softened slightly. "Looks like you found him in time." Ethan, dripping and exhausted, nodded. "He almost didn't make it." Caleb knelt briefly, studying Sonny with the practiced eye of someone used to emergencies. "He'll be fine once you get him warm. Pup-like, that's got more fight than folks think." He looked at Ethan, his tone measured. "But you should be careful. A storm like this, things can turn deadly quick." Ethan met his eyes, recognizing the subtext. It wasn't just the weather Caleb referred to. The whole town had heard whispers about Silas Moore, and Caleb, though bound by law, knew men like Silas operated in the shadows. The officer gave Ethan a short nod, as if acknowledging the unspoken truth, then jogged back into the rain to continue his patrol. Back inside the apartment, Ethan toweled Sonny dry, wrapping him in blankets near the heater. The pup nestled against his chest, his shivers fading as Rex laid down beside them, pressing close to share his warmth. Ethan felt the storm still raging outside, but inside, a different calm settled over him. For weeks, Sonny had been a rescued stray, uncertain of his place. Tonight, when he had buried his head against Ethan's chest, as if the world outside could no longer reach him, something changed. From that night forward, Sonny refused to sleep alone. Every evening he climbed onto the old rug where Rex rested, tucking himself against the shepherd's flank. Sometimes, in the small hours, he crept even closer to Ethan's bed, pressing his golden head against the side until Ethan reached down to rest a hand on him. For Ethan, who had known years of nights haunted by loneliness, the warmth of the pup at his side was more than comfort. It was family. The storm had passed, leaving Cedar Falls washed clean, but the unease it carried into Ethan's chest hadn't gone with the rain. Days later, the sun shone bright on the cracked sidewalks, but the veteran's instincts kept warning him that danger had not retreated. Silas Moore was not a man who walked away after being denied. Ethan knew that from the way the scarred man's eyes had lingered on Sonny at the garage weeks before. Men like Silas operated with patience and venom, waiting until their prey thought it safe before striking again. It was a Thursday morning when Ethan returned to work at Jensen's garage. The small brick building sat at the edge of town, its walls mottled with decades of oil stains, the gravel yard cluttered with half-dead cars waiting for resurrection. Jensen himself was already bent under the hood of an old Ford, his broad back curved, his white hair damp with sweat, even in the cool air. The old mechanic glanced up as Ethan arrived with Rex and Sonny at his side. He gave a short grunt of acknowledgement, his way of greeting. Ethan tied Rex's leash loosely to a post and set Sonny down, letting the pup wander near the workbench with a battered tennis ball. The morning dragged quietly until the sound of an engine rolled up the gravel. A black pickup truck pulled in, polished but carrying the weight of hard miles. Behind the wheel sat none other than Silas Moore, his dark leather jacket gleaming in the sun, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing the scar that cut his face. Two men stepped out with him. One was tall and wiry, with a pockmarked face and restless hands that kept adjusting the brim of his cap. The other was heavier, with a shaved head and thick arms, a faded tattoo crawling up his neck. Both looked like men who had seen the inside of county jail and learned nothing from it. "Morning," Silas drawled, his voice oiled with mock politeness. "Truck's making a noise. Thought I'd give you folks some business." Jensen straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing. He recognized trouble when he saw it, but business was business, and in Cedar Falls refusing a customer could cause more problems than it solved. "Pop the hood," Jensen muttered. While Jensen moved to inspect the vehicle, Silas's eyes wandered. They landed on Sonny, who was pawing clumsily at the ball, tail wagging. The smile that spread across Silas's face was sharp as broken glass. He took a step forward. "That the little golden we talked about?" Ethan's body stiffened instantly. He stepped between Silas and the pup, his hand lowering instinctively toward his side where his revolver rested, concealed beneath his jacket. "He's not yours," Ethan said, his voice even but carrying steel. Silas chuckled. "Relax, soldier. Just admiring. Fine pup like that deserves a better place than this dusty shop. I'll make you an offer, 50 this time." "Not for sale," Ethan repeated. The wiry man with the pockmarked face smirked. "Boss, maybe he just don't understand the generosity." He moved as if to circle around Ethan, eyes flicking toward Sonny. Before Ethan could react, Rex erupted. The German shepherd lunged forward with a bark that cracked through the garage like a gunshot. His body was taut, every muscle alive, fangs bared in raw defense. Sonny froze, then in a burst of instinct began barking too, his small body trembling, but his voice surprisingly fierce. Jensen slammed the hood shut with a bang that echoed like thunder. "That's enough," he barked. His old eyes, usually tired, flared with anger. "You boys get out before you bring more trouble than you can handle." Silas's smile curdled into a sneer. He snapped his fingers, and the heavy-set man lunged forward, reaching for Sonny. Ethan moved like lightning, his revolver out and raised before the thug's hand could close. "Don't," Ethan said, his voice steady as stone. The moment stretched taut, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. Then, as if on cue, the screech of tires sounded outside. A squad car rolled in, lights flashing, siren off, but presence undeniable. Officer Caleb Marsh stepped out, his tall frame commanding in his rain-darkened uniform, his blond hair catching the sunlight. His square jaw tightened as he assessed the scene, his sharp blue eyes moving from Ethan's drawn revolver to Silas's men frozen mid-motion. "More," Caleb said flatly. "Didn't take long for your stink to reach me again." He looked to Ethan. "Lower it, Cole. I've got it from here." Ethan hesitated only a second, then holstered his weapon. Caleb stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Hands where I can see them." The wiry man muttered, but lifted his arms. The heavy-set thug followed reluctantly. Silas, still smiling that cold snake smile, raised his hand slowly. "No harm done, officer, just a misunderstanding." "Funny," Caleb said, pulling cuffs from his belt. "Every time you're involved, there's a misunderstanding." Within minutes, Silas and his men were cuffed and led to the squad car. As they passed, Silas turned his head, eyes locking with Ethan's. "This ain't over," he hissed. Caleb shoved him forward, ignoring the threat. When the car pulled away, silence settled over the garage. Jensen let out a long breath, shaking his head. "Hell of a morning," he muttered. He looked at Ethan, his gaze different now, less judgment, more respect. "You stood tall, Cole. Not many would." Sonny scampered toward Ethan, pressing against his leg, still barking softly as though trying to prove his courage. Ethan knelt, ruffling the pup's damp ears, his heart swelling unexpectedly. "Good boy," he whispered. For the first time, Ethan realized it wasn't just him protecting Sonny. Somehow, in his small, fragile way, Sonny was giving him strength too. The weeks after Silas Moore's arrest brought a change to Cedar Falls, subtle at first, then steadily clearer, like the sun returning after long days of gray. Ethan Cole noticed it not in grand gestures, but in the quiet ways people began to look at him differently. The old glares of suspicion, the whispers that once followed his back, softened. He was no longer just the broken veteran who kept to himself at the edge of town. He was the man who had stood his ground, who had fought to protect what was his. Sonny grew rapidly in that time. His golden coat turned thicker and shinier, his once fragile body filling out with strength. He bounded through the yard with the joy of youth, chasing Rex's shadow as if determined to match him stride for stride. Rex, now graying at the muzzle but still strong, seemed to accept his new role as teacher and protector. When Sonny tumbled, Rex stood over him until he got up again. When Ethan threw a stick, Rex retrieved it first, but always let Sonny carry it back, tail wagging proudly. The bond between the two dogs mirrored something inside Ethan. Companionship built not on blood, but on trust, loyalty, and the refusal to let go. One morning Ethan heard laughter outside his porch. A group of children had gathered by the fence, drawn by the sight of Sonny leaping through the grass. Among them was Emily Harper, a girl of about 8 with dark curly hair that framed a freckled face. She wore patched jeans and a hand-knit sweater, her small hands clutching a school satchel nearly as big as her torso. She was the daughter of a single mother who lived 2 streets down, and she was known for her fearless curiosity. Emily pressed her face against the slats of the fence, giggling when Sonny ran up and licked her fingers through the wood. "Can he come out?" Emily called, her voice bright. Ethan, standing on the porch, felt an unexpected smile tug at his mouth. He opened the gate, and Sonny bounded toward the children, his tail a golden blur. The children squealed with delight as they took turns petting him, their laughter rising above the hum of the neighborhood. Rex watched carefully, his steady gaze ensuring order, but even he seemed calmer, lying in the sun as though approving of the chaos. Mrs. Donnelly, the storekeeper who had once called Ethan a fool, passed by on her way home from the shop. She carried a paper bag of groceries and slowed when she saw the scene. For a long moment she watched silently. Then, with a sigh, she set the bag on the porch. "For the dogs," she muttered gruffly. Her sharp eyes softened just a little as she added, "Guess they've done you some good." Without waiting for a reply, she walked on, her robe flapping in the wind. Later that week, Ethan found another gift, a sack of kibble left by his door before dawn. No note, no explanation, but he suspected Jensen. The old mechanic had grown quieter around him since the incident at the garage, but Ethan noticed the way his gaze lingered with a respect that hadn't been there before. Jensen never admitted it, but his silent offering spoke volumes. Life began to feel less like survival and more like belonging. Ethan walked Rex and Sonny through the city park in the evenings when the sky turned the color of embers and shadows stretched long across the grass. He noticed neighbors nodding to him, some even offering a few words. It wasn't warmth exactly, not yet, but it wasn't the cold dismissal he had lived with for so long. One evening, Officer Caleb Marsh joined him at the park, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, a rare sign of ease. Caleb walked with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command but softened by humility. He scratched Rex behind the ears, smiled as Sonny attempted to climb into his lap, despite being nearly too big for such antics, and said quietly, "You've done good, Cole. They've brought you back to us, whether you realize it or not." Ethan met his gaze, and though words failed him, the truth was clear in the steady weight of his nod. As summer settled over Cedar Falls, Sonny grew into his name. He carried light with him wherever he went, into the garage where Jensen muttered less and smiled more, into the store where Mrs. Donnelly occasionally slipped Ethan discounts without explanation, and onto the streets where children followed him with laughter. Ethan no longer walked with the weight of invisible chains. Instead, he walked with Rex on one side and Sonny on the other, each step steady, each glance forward filled with something he hadn't known in years: hope. On a late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and crimson, Ethan took both dogs to the park. The grass shimmered under the fading light, and the air carried the sound of children still playing, neighbors chatting on benches, and the faint hum of cicadas. He sat on a weathered bench, Rex at his feet, Sonny pressed against his knee. For a long time he watched the horizon, letting the peace sink into his bones. He realized then that the loneliness that had haunted him since leaving the service was no longer a weight he carried. It had been replaced, not by grand victories, not by medals or titles, but by a small family forged through struggle, loyalty, and second chances. As the last light dipped below the trees, Ethan rose and began the walk home, with Rex and Sonny flanking him. Their shadows stretched behind them, not of a solitary man, but of a man and his dogs, a unit, a family. Cedar Falls, once a place of whispers and suspicion, now felt different. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And for Ethan Cole, that was enough. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or fire from the heavens. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in fur, walking on four paws, carrying love we never thought we deserved. Ethan's story reminds us that even in the loneliest corners of our lives, God can send us companions to heal our brokenness. In every wag of a tail, in every loyal gaze, there is a whisper of His grace, proof that family can be found, not just born. And maybe that is the true blessing, to realize that we are never truly alone. The Lord works through small wonders, turning strays into family and strangers into community. May God bless you and your loved ones. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others. Leave a comment below about your own small miracles and subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring tales of hope, faith, and second chances. Together, let's keep the light of kindness alive.